Taewon Park stood in the massive doorway of the Great Assembly Hall and felt his mouth drop open. The sight before him was unlike anything he had ever seen, even in his wildest dreams about alien worlds. The hall stretched out like a metal canyon, its walls rising so high that the ceiling disappeared into shadows. Hundreds of different beings moved across the polished floor, their voices creating a sound like ocean waves mixed with wind chimes. Some walked on two legs like humans, others crawled on many legs, and a few floated through the air without touching the ground at all. But what made Taewon stare was not the aliens themselves. It was what they carried. The Vorthak delegation marched in perfect formation, their 7-foot frames covered in gleaming battle armor that looked like it could stop a tank. Each warrior held a plasma lance that hummed with deadly energy, the weapons as tall as a human and glowing with inner fire. Their helmets were shaped like the skulls of ancient predators, with glowing red eyes that tracked everything around them. Near the center of the hall, the Kepler representatives moved in a tight cluster. These insect-like beings carried bioweapons that seemed to be alive, writhing and pulsing in their many-armed grips. The weapons looked like they had been grown rather than built, with wet surfaces that reflected the hall's lights in disturbing ways. Armed warrior castes surrounded the diplomats, their chittering voices never stopping their constant communication. The ethereal collective floated above the crowd, their translucent bodies shimmering like ghosts. Around them, the air itself seemed to bend and twist, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. Taewon could feel a strange pressure in his head whenever he glanced their way, and he quickly learned to avoid their section of the hall entirely. Even the smaller delegations came armed. The rock-like beings from the crystalline hegemony carried devices that made the floor vibrate with each step. The aquatic depth-dwellers wore powered suits that dripped with unknown liquids, their tentacles wrapped around weapons that looked like living coral. Every species, every delegation, every single alien in the hall carried weapons that could probably level city blocks. The display of firepower was incredible, terrifying, and completely normal according to everything Taewon had learned about galactic diplomacy. Except for one group. The human delegation walked through this armed camp wearing nothing more threatening than simple gray suits and carrying data tablets. Ambassador Jiho Kim led the way, his steps confident and relaxed. Cultural attaché Dabin Lee walked beside him, actually smiling and nodding to various alien delegates as they passed. They looked like businessmen heading to a board meeting, not diplomats entering a gathering of the galaxy's most dangerous species. Taewon hurried to catch up with them, his mind spinning with confusion. "Ambassador Kim," he whispered urgently, "shouldn't we have weapons? Everyone else does. I mean, look at them." Jiho glanced back at the young diplomat with amusement in his eyes. "First time at a planetary forum, Taewon?" "Yes, sir. And I studied all the protocols, but I don't understand why we're the only ones who came unarmed. The Vorthak could cook us with those lances, and the Kepler weapons look like they could eat us alive." Dabin laughed softly. "Oh, they probably could. But that's not why we don't carry weapons, then why?" Taewon looked around nervously as a group of Vorthak warriors passed nearby, their armor clanking with each heavy step. "Are we under some kind of treaty restriction? Did we lose a war?" "Quite the opposite," Jiho said. He guided their small group toward their assigned seats, which Taewon now realized were positioned in the exact center of the hall, right where everyone could see them, right where they would be completely exposed if fighting broke out. "I don't understand," Taewon said. "You will," Dabin assured him. "But first, let me ask you something. In all your studies of galactic history, did you ever wonder why humans were invited to join the planetary forums at all? We're one of the youngest species in the galaxy. We've only been in space for a few centuries. Most of these civilizations have been traveling the stars for thousands of years." Taewon thought about it. "I assumed it was because of our technology, or our military strength, or maybe our trading capabilities." "All good guesses," Jiho said as they took their seats. "But wrong. We were invited because the other species were afraid of what might happen if they didn't invite us." "Afraid? Of us?" Taewon looked around at the heavily armed aliens filling the hall. "But we're just humans. We don't even have weapons here. Exactly, Dabin said with a knowing smile. Before Taewon could ask what that meant, a deep voice spoke, behind them in heavily accented standard language. Your people most dangerous when carry no weapons. Taewon spun around and found himself face to face with a Vorthak war chief. The alien stood over 8 feet tall, his battle armor decorated with symbols that probably represented victories in combat. His plasma lance was powered down but still hummed with potential energy. Most terrifying of all, he was removing his helmet. Taewon had never seen a Vorthak face before. The features were reptilian but somehow noble, with intelligent golden eyes and scales that shifted color with the light. Battle scars marked the left side of his face, and his expression was serious but not hostile. War Chief Kethvar, Jiho said, standing and bowing slightly. It's good to see you again. Ambassador Kim. The war chief returned the bow with precise military bearing. I bring greetings from the Vorthak High Command. They wish you to know that your people's presence here brings comfort. Comfort? Taewon blurted out before he could stop himself. But you have all those weapons and we don't have anything. War Chief Kethvar turned his golden eyes toward the young human. When he spoke, his voice was gentle despite its deep tone. Young human, that is exactly why your people bring comfort. We carry weapons because we are afraid. You carry nothing because you do not need to be. I still don't understand, Taewon said. The war chief looked at Jiho, who nodded permission. Then let me tell you what my grandfather told me and his grandfather told him. 300 years ago, your people came to their first planetary forum. They carried weapons, as is proper. They followed all protocols, as is respectful. But something happened during those meetings that changed everything. What happened? Taewon asked. They solved a trade dispute that had lasted 50 years, in one afternoon, without firing a shot or making a single threat. The war chief's scales darkened slightly, but more than that, they made every species in that room realize something terrible. Dabin leaned forward. What did they realize? War Chief Kethvar looked directly at Taewon. They realized that humans don't need weapons to be the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Your minds are weapons enough. The Great Hall began to quiet as the opening ceremonies prepared to begin, but Taewon barely noticed. His head was spinning with questions, and the war chief's words echoed in his mind. We remember, Kethvar said quietly, putting his helmet back on. We all remember. That is why you are the only species trusted to walk among us unarmed. Because being weaponless is not your weakness, young human. It is your greatest display of power. The war chief turned and walked back to his delegation, leaving Taewon staring after him with his mouth open once again. Ambassador Jiho placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. Ready for your real education in galactic diplomacy to begin? 300 years earlier, Captain Hyunwoo Choi stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel New Seoul and watched the massive space station grow larger on the main screen. Nexus Prime was the largest artificial structure he had ever seen, a city-sized sphere of metal and crystal that housed the Galactic Council's most important meetings. First contact protocols are in effect, announced Communications Officer Sora Lim from her station. We're receiving docking instructions in 17 different languages. Any problems with translation? Hyunwoo asked. None so far, Captain. The universal translator is handling everything perfectly. Sora paused, listening to her earpiece. Sir, they're asking about our weapons manifest for the ceremonial display. Dr. Yunbi Song looked up from her xenobiology reports. Ceremonial display? Colonel Minho Kang answered from the security station. It's part of their diplomatic protocol. Each species demonstrates their martial capabilities as a sign of strength and respect. Like a formal introduction, but with weapons instead of handshakes, Hyunwoo nodded. Send them our standard military equipment list. Kinetic rifles, energy shields, plasma grenades, the usual. Transmitted, sir, Sora confirmed. Dr. Yunbi frowned as she reviewed her cultural research files. I'm still not comfortable with this approach. Everything I've read suggests that these species use violence and intimidation as primary diplomatic tools. That's why we're bringing weapons, Minho said. can't negotiate from a position of weakness. But what if we're misunderstanding their intentions? Yunbi asked. What if the weapons display isn't about intimidation? What if it's about something else entirely? Captain Hyunwoo considered this. Dr. Yunbi was the best xenopsychologist in the fleet, and her insights had saved human lives more than once. What do you think it might be about? I'm not sure yet, but I want to study their behavior during the ceremony. Maybe we can learn something about how they think. 2 hours later, the human delegation stood in the Great Assembly Hall for the first time. Hyunwoo felt small and exposed as he looked around at the alien representatives. Every species seemed designed for war in some way. The Vorthak were massive reptilian warriors, their natural armor enhanced with technology that made them look like walking tanks. Their plasma weapons were extensions of their heat-resistant biology, designed to channel the same thermal energy their bodies produced naturally. The Kepler moved like a single organism, despite having hundreds of individual bodies. Their bioweapons seemed to be living creatures, pulsing and breathing in harmony with their wielders. Dr. Yunbi whispered that the weapons were probably modified versions of their natural symbiotic organisms. The crystalline hegemonies, sonic disruptors matched their method of communication, using sound waves as both language and weapon. The ethereal collective's psychic dampeners protected and projected their natural mental abilities. Notice the pattern, Dr. Yunbi murmured as they walked toward the demonstration area. Each species' weapons complement their natural evolution. They're not just tools. They're extensions of what these beings already are. The ceremony began with the Vorthak. Their war chief stepped forward and ignited his plasma lance, the weapon blazing with heat that Hyunwoo could feel from 50 meters away. The alien roared a battle cry that echoed through the hall, then performed a complex series of combat moves that were both beautiful and terrifying. The other species applauded by making their own natural sounds, clicks, hums, crystalline chimes, and psychic pulses that made Hyunwoo's head ache slightly. The Kepler went next. Their demonstration looked like a dance, with dozens of warriors moving in perfect synchronization, while their bioweapons created patterns of living light. The weapons seemed to communicate with each other, responding to commands that were never spoken aloud. Each species that followed showed the same thing, weapons that were natural extensions of their biology and psychology. The ethereals made reality itself bend around their mental projections. The crystallines created music that could shatter stone. Finally, it was humanity's turn. Colonel Minho stepped forward carrying a standard kinetic rifle. Compared to the alien weapons, it looked primitive and simple. He demonstrated its accuracy by hitting targets at various distances, then showed the effectiveness of human energy shields and the explosive power of plasma grenades. The alien delegates watched politely, but Hyunwoo could sense their lack of interest. Human technology was adequate but unremarkable. Some of the younger aliens even seemed bored, but Dr. Yunbi was watching something else entirely. She had her bioscanner running, monitoring the aliens' vital signs during each demonstration. As Minho finished his presentation, she grabbed Hyunwoo's arm. "Captain, we need to talk. Privately. Right now." They stepped away from the main group, finding a quiet corner of the hall. Dr. Yunbi's face was pale, and her hands were shaking slightly as she reviewed her scanner readings. "What is it?" Hyunwoo asked. "The aliens' stress responses during our demonstration," she said. "They barely reacted to our weapons at all. Heart rates normal, brain activity stable, no signs of concern or interest. That's not surprising. Our technology isn't as advanced as theirs. That's just it. They weren't looking at our technology." Dr. Unbi turned the scanner toward him. "Look at these readings from when Colonel Minho was just standing there, before he even picked up the rifle." Hyunwoo studied the data. "These stress levels are off the charts. Every single species showed the same pattern. The moment any human stepped into the demonstration area, their biological alarm systems activated. Not when we showed our weapons, when we showed ourselves. Maybe they're just nervous about meeting a new species." Dr. Yunbi shook her head. "I've been monitoring them all day. They were curious about us before. Maybe a little cautious, but not afraid. This is different. This is instinctive fear, the kind that happens when a prey animal sees a predator. Hyunwoo felt a chill run down his spine. Are you saying they see us as predators? I'm saying they see us as something their evolution never prepared them to handle. Dr. Yunbi looked back at the alien delegates, who were now engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation. Think about it. Every species here has weapons that match their natural abilities. Their biology determines their technology, and their technology reflects their psychology. And humans? Humans adapt. We don't have natural weapons, so we make tools. We don't have specialized biology, so we modify ourselves and our environment. We're not locked into evolutionary patterns like they are. The implications hit Hyunwoo like a physical blow. They can predict each other because they understand each other's evolutionary limitations. Exactly. The Vorthak think like warriors, because they evolved as warriors. The Kepler think like a collective because they evolved as a hive mind. The Ethereals think logically because emotion would interfere with their psychic abilities. Dr. Yunbi's voice dropped to a whisper. But humans? We can think like warriors when we need to be warriors, like a collective when we need to cooperate, like individuals when we need to compete. We're not locked into any single pattern, so they can't predict us. Worse than that, we can predict them, but they can't predict us. From their perspective, we're completely unpredictable predators who can adapt to any situation and think in ways their evolution never prepared them for. Hyunwoo looked around the hall with new eyes. The heavily armed aliens suddenly seemed less threatening and more vulnerable. No wonder they're afraid. The question is, Dr. Yunbi said, what are we going to do about it? Before Hyunwoo could answer, a Vorthak approached their group. It was the same war chief who had performed the opening demonstration, but his plasma lance was powered down and his posture was respectful rather than aggressive. Human captain, the alien said in carefully pronounced standard. The council requests your presence for the first negotiation session. There is a matter that has troubled us for many years. Perhaps your people can offer perspective. Hyunwoo and Dr. Yunbi exchanged glances. They both understood that this was either a great opportunity or a terrible trap. We would be honored to help, Hyunwoo said. As they followed the war chief toward the council chambers, Dr. Yunbi whispered, whatever happens next, remember that they're already afraid of us. We need to be very careful not to make that fear worse. The council chamber was smaller than the Great Assembly Hall, but somehow felt more intimidating. Representatives from 12 different species sat in a circle, each group surrounded by the soft glow of translation fields. The air hummed with tension that had nothing to do with the advanced technology filling the room. Young-ho Nam sat between Captain Hyunwoo and Dr. Yunbi, trying to understand the problem that had brought them here. For the past 2 hours, he had listened to the same arguments repeated over and over again in different languages and with increasing frustration. The issue seemed simple enough on the surface. 3 species, the Vorthak, the Kepler, and the crystalline hegemony, all claimed mining rights to the same star system. The system contained rare minerals that were essential for interstellar travel, making it incredibly valuable. But the dispute had been going on for 67 years without resolution. Young-ho had been chosen for this meeting because of his background in psychological operations and negotiation. He had spent years studying how different human cultures thought and made decisions. But listening to these aliens argue was like watching people try to solve a puzzle while wearing blindfolds. The Vorthak representative, War Chief Kethvar, stood and activated a holographic display. The hegemony's claim is without honor, he declared. They discovered the system by accident while fleeing from our forces during the Third Border War. A warrior does not gain territory by running away from battle. The crystalline delegate's response came as a series of musical tones that the translators converted to words. Honor is irrelevant. Legal discovery protocols state that the first species to file a formal claim with the Galactic Registry holds primary rights. We filed our claim 67 years ago. The Kepler swarm speaker's voice was a harmony of dozens of individual voices speaking as one. Both claims are flawed. The system lies within our historical expansion zone as defined by the Treaty of Via. Convergence. We have the right to claim any uninhabited system within our zone for the good of the collective. And then they would start over again, making the exact same arguments they had been making for decades. Young Ho glanced at Dr. Yunbi, who was monitoring the alien's biosigns with her scanner. She caught his eye and shook her head slightly. The frustration levels in the room were rising, but none of the species seemed capable of changing their approach to the problem. Captain, Young Ho whispered to Hyunwoo. Permission to try something? What do you have in mind? I think I know why they're stuck. Each species is trapped by their own psychology. They can't see the situation from any perspective except their own. Dr. Yunbi leaned closer. That matches what I'm seeing in their bio readings. Their stress patterns suggest they're genuinely confused by each other's positions, not just being stubborn. Hyunwoo considered this. What's your plan? Let me try to translate their arguments into terms each species can understand. Not the words, the thinking behind the words. Without waiting for permission, Young Ho stood up. The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the human. Honored delegates, he began. I believe I see the source of your disagreement. You're all correct according to your own cultural and legal systems, but you're not speaking the same language. War Chief, Kethvar's scales darkened with irritation. We are using the standard translation protocols. Yes, but translation only converts words, not concepts. Young Ho activated his own small holographic display. War Chief, you argue that the crystalline hegemony cannot claim territory they found while retreating. This makes perfect sense from a warrior's perspective. Honor comes from conquest, not from accident. The Vorthak nodded firmly. But consider this, Young Ho continued. What if retreat was not cowardice but strategy? What if the hegemony was not fleeing from your forces, but drawing them away from a more valuable target? In that case, discovering the system becomes the result of successful tactical thinking. Kethavar's scale shifted to a lighter color indicating deep thought. Strategic withdrawal for greater gain. This has honor. The crystalline delegate chimed with surprise. You understand our position? Not yet, Young Ho said. Let me explain. It to the Kepler Collective. He turned to the swarm speaker. You claim the system based on the Treaty of Convergence, which gave each species expansion rights in specific zones. This makes sense for a collective society. Individual desires are less important than the group's established agreements. The harmony of Kepler voices hummed in agreement. But consider this perspective, Young Ho said. What if honoring the treaty in this case actually harms the collective good? The system's resources could benefit all three species if shared properly. Wouldn't it be better for the collective if everyone gained something instead of fighting over everything? The swarm speakers' voices fell silent for a moment, then resumed in a different harmony. Shared benefit for all collectives. This serves the greater good. Young Ho turned to the crystalline delegate. And for the hegemony, I understand that legal precedent is crucial. Your society functions on logical systems and established procedures. The first to file a claim should indeed have primary rights. Musical tones indicated agreement. But what if we modify the concept slightly? Instead of one species having primary rights, what if the first to file gets first choice of mining locations within the system? The legal precedent is maintained, but the practical result allows multiple parties to benefit. The chamber erupted in musical harmonics that the translators interpreted as excited discussion among the crystalline delegates. Communications Officer Sora Lim, who had been quiet throughout the session, suddenly leaned forward. I think I see where Young Ho is going with this, she said. Each species gets what they actually need instead of fighting over symbolic victory. Exactly, Young Ho said. He turned back to the assembled delegates. War Chief, your people need the heavy metals for ship armor. The deep core mines would give you the highest quality materials. The Kepler Collective needs the rare elements for their biotechnology. The asteroid fields contain those in abundance. And the crystalline hegemony needs the energy crystals for their sonic technologies. The outer planets have crystal formations. That would be perfect. Dr. Yunbi was watching her bioscanner with amazement. "The stress levels in the room are dropping rapidly," she whispered to Captain Hyunwoo. "I think this might actually work." For the next hour, Young-ho worked with Sora to help each species understand not just what the others wanted, but why they wanted it. They helped the Vorthak see that sharing the system could demonstrate the wisdom of strong leadership. They showed the Kepler how cooperation would benefit the galactic collective as a whole. They helped the crystalline hegemony understand that flexible interpretation of legal precedents could create stronger legal frameworks for the future. By the end of the session, the three species had not only resolved their dispute, but had agreed to a joint mining operation that would give each group more resources than any of them could have extracted alone. As the delegates filed out of the chamber, chattering excitedly in their various languages, Captain Hyunwoo pulled Young-ho aside. "That was incredible," Hyunwoo said. "How did you know how to approach each species?" Young-ho shrugged. "It wasn't that difficult once I understood their psychological patterns. The Vorthak think in terms of honor and strength. The Kepler think in terms of collective benefit. The crystallines think in terms of logical systems. I just translated the problem into terms each group could work with." "But how did you figure out their psychological patterns so quickly?" "The same way I figure out human psychological patterns. You listen to how people argue, watch how they react to different ideas, and look for the underlying assumptions they never question." Young-ho paused. "Why? Was there something unusual about what I did?" Before Captain Hyunwoo could answer, Dr. Eunbi rushed over with her bioscanner. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. "We have a problem," she said quietly. "A big problem." "What kind of problem?" Hyunwoo asked. "I've been monitoring the aliens' biological responses throughout the entire session. At first, everything looked normal. Elevated stress from the negotiation, then relief when they reached agreement." "That sounds like what I'd expect," Young-ho said. "But then I noticed something else. About halfway through your presentation, their biopatterns started showing signs of recognition. And by the end, they were all showing the same response pattern." "Which is?" Dr. Yunbi looked around to make sure no aliens were within hearing distance. "The same pattern prey animals show when they realize they've been outmaneuvered by a predator. Not fear exactly, but a kind of shocked understanding that they've been psychologically manipulated without even realizing it." Young-ho felt a chill run down his spine. "But I wasn't manipulating them. I was helping them find a solution that worked for everyone. I know. That's what makes it so terrifying from their perspective." Dr. Yunbi pulled up the bio readings on her scanner. "You didn't just solve their problem, Young-ho. You mapped their entire psychological frameworks in real time, identified their cognitive blind spots, and then used those blind spots to guide them toward a solution they couldn't have reached on their own. But that's just good negotiation technique. For humans, yes. But these species have never encountered a mind that works like ours." Back in the present day, Taewon Park sat in stunned silence as Ambassador Jiho Kim finished explaining what had happened after the great negotiation session 3 centuries ago. The sounds of the current planetary forum continued around them, but Taewon barely noticed the alien delegates preparing for the day's discussions. "So they called an emergency session of the Galactic Council?" Taewon asked. "Not just an emergency session," Dabin Lee said. "They called a species evaluation hearing. Only the 3rd one in galactic history." "What's a species evaluation hearing?" Jiho's expression grew serious. "It's when the council decides whether a newly discovered species is too dangerous to be allowed to participate in galactic civilization. The previous 2 hearings resulted in complete quarantine of the species in question." Taewon felt his stomach drop. "Quarantine? Isolation from all galactic contact until the species either evolves beyond the dangerous traits or destroys itself," Dabin explained. "It's not done lightly, but after what happened in that negotiation chamber, every species in the galaxy was asking the same question. What happens when humans turn their psychological abilities against us instead of for us?" A new voice joined their conversation. "That's when I was called in to testify." Taewon turned to see an elderly woman approaching their section. Despite her age, she moved with the confident stride of someone accustomed to command. Her gray hair was pulled back in a simple style, and her diplomatic uniform bore the insignia of a senior cultural analyst. Elder Kyungmin Bae, Jiho said, standing to greet her with a respectful bow. I hoped you would join us today. I wouldn't miss young Taewon's first forum, Kyungmin said with a warm smile. Especially not when he's asking the same questions I asked all those years ago. You were there during the evaluation hearing? Taewon asked. I was the lead witness for humanity's defense. Kyungmin settled into a seat beside them, though at the time I wasn't sure we had a defense. Dabin activated a small privacy screen around their group, creating a bubble of silence in the noisy hall. Tell him about the council's investigation. Kyungmin's eyes grew distant with memory. They spent 6 months studying everything about human evolution, psychology, and behavior. Teams of the galaxy's best xenobiologists, psychologists, and military strategists. They interviewed every human at the forum, ran psychological tests, even brought in experts from species we had never met before. What were they looking for? Taewon asked. They were trying to understand how dangerous we really were, and more importantly, whether our psychological abilities were intentional weapons or just an accident of evolution. What did they find? The HFY truth was worse than anyone had imagined. Kyungmin paused, watching a group of Kepler delegates pass by. Their chittering conversation stopped briefly as they noticed the humans, and several of them made gestures that looked like respectful bows before moving on. They found that humans are what they called a mirror species, Kyungmin continued. We evolved on a world with extreme environmental variability. Instead of developing specialized evolutionary niches like other species, we developed the ability to rapidly adapt to any niche. Taewon frowned. I don't understand how that makes us dangerous. Think about it, Jiho said. The Vorthak evolved as warriors on a hot, dangerous world. Their psychology reflects that. They think in terms of honor, strength, and combat. The Kepler evolved as a hive mind on a world where cooperation was essential for survival. They think collectively and prioritize group benefit over individual desires. And the crystalline hegemony evolved on a world where logic and systematic thinking were necessary for survival, Dabin added. So they think in terms of rules, procedures, and consistent systems. But humans, Kyungmin said, evolved on a world where the only constant was change. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, droughts, floods, climate shifts that could happen within a single generation. We couldn't afford to be locked into any single way of thinking. The implications hit Taewon like a physical blow, so we unconsciously mirror whatever psychological pattern we encounter. Not exactly mirror, Kyungmin said. We unconsciously analyze and adapt to whatever psychological patterns we encounter. When we're around warriors, we instinctively understand warrior psychology. Around collective thinkers, we understand hive mentality. Around logical species, we think systematically. But we also see the flaws in each system because we're not bound by them, Jiho added. We can think like a Vorthak warrior when it's useful, but we can also step back and see the blind spots that warrior thinking creates. Taewon felt dizzy. So every human is a walking psychological analysis machine? Every human is a natural predator of psychological systems, Kyungmin said bluntly. We don't even realize we're doing it. It's as natural as breathing. A communication device on Dabin's wrist chimed softly. He glanced at it and smiled. Perfect timing. Dr. Soo-Young Cho is available for a video call. She was part of the original evaluation team. A holographic display activated above their group, showing the face of a middle-aged woman with intelligent eyes and graying hair. She appeared to be in some kind of laboratory, with alien artifacts visible in the background. Hello, everyone, Dr. Soo-Young said. Kyungmin told me you have a young diplomat who needs to understand our history. Dr. Cho, Taewon said, can you help me understand what the council discovered about human psychology? Of course. Let me start with a question for you. What do you think makes humans successful as a species? Taewon thought about it. Our intelligence, our tool-making abilities, our capacity for cooperation. All good answers, but you're missing the crucial factor. What makes humans unique is our psychological flexibility. Other species develop specialized minds that work perfectly within their evolutionary niche, but struggle outside of it. Humans developed generalized minds that can adapt to any niche. But how does that make us dangerous? Dr. Su-Young's expression grew serious. Because psychological flexibility isn't just about adapting to environments, it's about adapting to other minds. When you put a human in a room with members of other species, the human unconsciously begins to map their psychological patterns, identify their cognitive limitations, and find ways to work within or around those limitations. The Council's investigation found that this process happens automatically, Kyungmin added. Humans don't choose to do it. We can't turn it off. It's hardwired into our brains by millions of years of evolution. And it's incredibly effective, Dr. Su-Young continued. During the evaluation, they tested human negotiators against AI systems designed to think like different alien species. In every case, the humans found ways to influence the AIs that the AIs couldn't detect or defend against. Taewon's hands were shaking slightly. So we really are as dangerous as they thought? More dangerous, Jiho said quietly. Because we don't think of ourselves as dangerous. Every other species in the galaxy knows their own psychological limitations and has developed cultural safeguards to protect against them. But humans? We think our psychological flexibility is just natural intelligence. The Council's final report called humans unconscious psychological predators, Dr. Su-Young said. We hunt other minds without realizing we're hunting. So what? Was their decision? Taewon asked, though he was almost afraid to hear the answer. Kyungmin smiled grimly. That's where it gets interesting. The vote on whether to quarantine humanity was scheduled to be the closest in Council history, but before they could vote, something unexpected happened. What? Humanity volunteered for restrictions, Jiho said. When we learned what our psychological abilities meant to other species, we offered to limit ourselves. The Council had never seen anything like it, Dr. Su-Young added. A species recognizing its own dangerous nature and choosing to restrain itself for the benefit of others. It changed everything. Taewon looked around at the armed alien delegates filling the hall. So that's why we don't carry weapons? That's why we're not allowed to carry weapons, Kyungmin corrected. The Council voted unanimously to accept humanity into galactic civilization, but only under specific restrictions. We can participate in all galactic activities, but we must do so without any technological advantages that might enhance our natural psychological abilities. No weapons, no advanced AI assistance, no psychological enhancement technologies, Dabin listed. We even have to undergo regular psychological evaluations to make sure we're aware of our own influence on others. Dr. Su-Young leaned forward in the holographic display. The Council's reasoning was simple. If humans are going to be psychological predators whether they want to be or not, then the galaxy needs to be able to see them coming. Making you go unarmed ensures that everyone knows exactly who the humans are and what they're capable of. It's not a punishment, Jiho said. It's a responsibility. We accepted the restrictions because we recognized that our psychological abilities give us an unfair advantage in any conflict or negotiation. Taewon sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the implications. So we're the most dangerous species in the galaxy, and everyone knows it. But they trust us because we choose to limit ourselves? Exactly, Kyungmin said. Being weaponless isn't a sign of weakness, young man. It's the ultimate demonstration of strength. It says we're so confident in our abilities that we don't need technological advantages. As the great assembly hall began to fill with delegates for the morning session, Taewon Park found himself watching everything with completely different eyes. The heavily armed alien representatives no longer looked threatening. They looked vulnerable. Each species was trapped by their own evolutionary psychology, unable to think beyond the patterns that had kept them alive for millions of years. And the humans walked among them unarmed, carrying the most dangerous weapons in the galaxy inside their own heads. I need to understand something, Taewon said to Ambassador Jiho Kim. If we're really as dangerous as you've explained, how do we make sure we don't accidentally hurt anyone? How do we control something that happens unconsciously? Before Jiho could answer, a new voice spoke behind them. That's the most important question any human diplomat can ask. Taewon turned to see a tall man in the formal uniform of a senior council representative. His insignia marked him as one of the highest-ranking human officials in galactic government. Counselor Ji-hoon Woo, Ji-ho said, standing respectfully. I was hoping you would speak with Taewon today. Of course. Ji-hoon took a seat beside the young diplomat. The transition from unconscious psychological predator to responsible galactic citizen is the most challenging part of any human's diplomatic education. How do you learn to control something you don't even realize you're doing? Taewon asked. With great difficulty and constant vigilance, Ji-hoon replied. Let me ask you something first. In your interactions with the alien delegates today, have you found yourself understanding their motivations or predicting their responses to different situations? Taewon thought about it. Well, yes. When War Chief Kethvar was speaking, I could tell he was being respectful but also testing whether I was worthy of respect. And when the Kepler delegates passed by earlier, I sensed they were curious about human behavior patterns. And how did you know these things? I could tell from their body language, their tone of voice, the way they positioned themselves. Taewon paused, realization dawning. Oh, I was unconsciously reading their psychological patterns, wasn't I? Without even trying, Ji-hoon confirmed. That's what makes human psychology so dangerous. We don't decide to analyze other minds. We just do it automatically, the same way we breathe or blink. Dabin Lee leaned forward. So how do we learn to be aware of something that happens below the level of consciousness? Training. Lots and lots of training. A new voice joined the conversation as Captain Sun-ho An approached their group. Unlike the diplomats, he wore the dark uniform of human security services, though like all humans at the forum, he carried no visible weapons. Captain An handles security for all human diplomatic missions, Ji-ho explained. He can tell you about the psychological restraint protocols. Sun-ho settled into the circle of humans, automatically positioning himself where he could observe the entire hall. Every human who works in galactic diplomacy undergoes minimum 2 years of psychological awareness training before their first assignment. What kind of training? Taewon asked. First, we learn to recognize when we're unconsciously analyzing other minds. There are subtle mental sensations that happen when your brain is mapping someone else's psychological patterns. We teach people to notice those sensations, like what? A slight feeling of understanding that comes too quickly. A sense of knowing how someone will react before they've given you enough information to actually know. The feeling that you can predict what someone will say next. Sun-ho demonstrated by pointing to a group of crystalline delegates across the hall. Right now, I can tell that those crystallines are having a disagreement about procedural matters, and I know exactly what arguments each side is making, even though I can't hear them, and they're speaking in harmonic frequencies I can't understand. Taewon followed his gaze and immediately felt what Sun-ho was describing. I can sense it too. There's something about their positioning and the rhythm of their communication that suggests logical arguments being presented in formal sequence. That's your unconscious psychological analysis system at work, Sun-ho said. The next step in training is learning to deliberately limit that analysis. How do you limit something unconscious? Cognitive restraint techniques, Ji-hoon explained. We teach humans to consciously reduce their pattern recognition abilities when interacting with other species. It's like learning to see less clearly on purpose. But doesn't that make us less effective as diplomats? It makes us less manipulative and more trustworthy, Ji-ho said, which is more important for long-term galactic relations. Captain Sun-ho activated a small holographic display showing brain scan images. These are neural activity patterns from human diplomats during negotiations. The red areas show psychological analysis activity, the parts of the brain that are unconsciously mapping other minds. The first image showed a human brain lit up like a Christmas tree, with red activity scattered throughout multiple regions. This is an untrained human diplomat during their first alien contact. Their brain is working overtime to analyze and predict alien behavior patterns. The second image showed much less red activity, concentrated in specific areas. This is the same diplomat after 2 years of restraint training. They've learned to consciously limit their psychological analysis to only what's necessary for communication, rather than full predatory assessment. It looks like they're thinking less, Taewon observed. In a way, they are, Sunho agreed. They're choosing to use only a fraction of their natural psychological abilities. It's like a master swordsman choosing to fight with a wooden practice sword instead of a steel blade. But why would anyone choose to be less effective? Elder Kyung-min, Bae, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Because being fully effective would mean being fully predatory. And predators don't have friends, they have prey. The weight of that statement settled over Taewon like a heavy blanket. So we choose to handicap ourselves to maintain relationships? Choose to handicap ourselves to maintain our humanity, Jihoon corrected. The Council's evaluation found that humans who use their full psychological abilities against other species gradually lose the ability to see those species as equals. They start viewing aliens as puzzles to be solved or resources to be managed, which leads to exactly the kind of psychological domination that the galaxy fears, Captain Sunho added. So we train our people to remain aware of their own psychological power and to consciously choose not to use it. What happens if someone can't learn the restraint techniques? Taewon asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. They're transferred to human-only assignments, Jiho said quietly. Research stations, colony administration, anything that doesn't involve regular contact with alien species. We can't risk having unrestrained humans in diplomatic positions. Has anyone ever lost control? The humans around Taewon exchanged glances, and he sensed there was a story they didn't want to tell. Once, Kyungmin said finally. About 50 years ago, a human trade negotiator named Woojin Park was working on a complex resource-sharing agreement. He was brilliant at his job, maybe too brilliant. Over the course of several years, he unconsciously developed such detailed psychological profiles of the alien trade partners that he could predict their decisions days in advance. What happened? He started treating the negotiations like a game. Not maliciously. He genuinely believed he was helping everyone reach better agreements, but he was making decisions for alien civilizations without them realizing it. He was essentially puppet mastering entire species' economic policies. Taewon felt sick. How did anyone find out? The alien trade partners eventually realized that their negotiation strategies kept changing in ways that benefited them more than their own plans would have. They became suspicious and requested a council investigation. When the investigators reviewed the negotiation records, they found that Woojin had unconsciously manipulated 17 different species into economic arrangements none of them would have agreed to if they had understood the long-term implications. Captain Sunho continued. And the worst part was that all the arrangements actually were beneficial for everyone involved. He had created a perfect economic system by turning alien civilizations into unconscious participants in his grand design. What happened to him? He was horrified when he realized what he had done, Jihoon said. He voluntarily entered psychological isolation and spent the rest of his life researching restraint techniques. His work forms the basis of our current training programs. And the alien species? They could have demanded his trial for psychological warfare, Kyungmin said. Instead, they asked that he be honored for demonstrating why human psychological restraint is necessary for galactic peace. The morning session bell chimed across the great assembly hall, and the alien delegates began moving toward their assigned sections. Taewon watched them with a mixture of awe and terror, understanding for the first time the true responsibility that came with being human in a galaxy of more predictable minds. So when we walk into these negotiations unarmed, Taewon said slowly, we're not just proving that we don't need weapons. We're proving that we can choose not to use the weapons we were born with. Exactly, Jiho said, standing as their delegation was called to participate in the day's discussions.